My house is haunted. Not like in those cliché horror movies where blood-piercing screams can be heard from the attic, or the crying of children echoing from the basement, but still haunted. Unlike the movies, it started right away too. I didn't have those first few days of comfort before the creepy things started to occur. I can distinctly remember the first paranormal thing that happened. I had just flopped down on the empty floor of the living room with a glass of red wine in my hand, proud of myself for getting this old house for such a small coin. I had barely taken a loan to afford it. My first day in this old Victorian house was spent unpacking. The house stood alone with at least a mile to the first neighbors, so I had decided to unpack all the boxes myself. The essentials were the first to be put to place, but with such a large house, I hadn't gotten very far. The intense work had taken its toll on my back, but I had finished both the kitchen and the bedroom. With a place to sleep and the food in a cold place, I decided to leave the rest till tomorrow. That's when I first heard it. A low, raspy sound that seemed to come from the room itself. It was drawn out and kept increasing in volume, only to suddenly stop. A few seconds later, it started again, in the same manner. At the time, I didn't think much of it, certain that it was just the pipes, or maybe the house settling in with its new owner. I just kept drinking my wine and fantasized of how I could tackle this room the next day. Eventually, I went off to bed. The noise got muffled when I left the room and got into bed, which only increased my suspicions that it was just the pipes. My thoughts wandered off, and after a while, I fell into deep slumber. A few hours later, I awoke. At first, I was confused of why I had woken up, but then it dawned on me. I remember vividly how my heart sank, and how the previously warm blankets now felt ice cold. Footsteps could be heard from outside my room. The old wooden floor creaked softly with each step that the person outside my door took. I was completely paralyzed with fear, and I dared not move. A few seconds elapsed, and the sound of footsteps eventually faded. I desperately searched for my phone around me, only to realize I had left it in the living room. I quietly got up, cursing myself for being so stupid. The thin bedroom door made no sounds as I peeked out in the darkness. My phone was just through this corridor and to the left, but it felt like a mile. No sounds of the intruder could be heard, but I was dead certain that it hadn't been a dream. I tiptoed through the darkness, trying my hardest to make no sounds as I approached the living room. There were only two places the stranger could be at. Either below me, down in the cellar, which I was desperately hoping for, or towards the kitchen and living room. I held my breath as I entered the room. I knew my phone was near the middle of the living room, but it was too dark to see. I didn't dare turn on the lights in fear of revealing my position. I threw myself onto the floor as I frantically searched for my phone. My fingers finally touched the side of the phone, and I grabbed it. Clutching it hard, I ran from the house. I called the police, and within 10 minutes they showed up. An officer stayed with me as his colleagues searched the house. Shaken, but relieved that I had gotten out without a scratch, I told the officer in more detail what had happened. Eventually, they came out again, without any intruders. They told me that the house was completely empty when they searched it. There were no signs of a break-in, and no windows were open to indicate an escape. They assured me that it must have been a dream, or maybe the old house itself which had made the noises. At the time, I actually got reassured by these words and entered my house again. After climbing into my bed once more, I started feeling a little bit silly for bringing the police in for such a small thing as a bad dream. I slept through the rest of the night without any other disturbances. This was only the beginning, as I would later realize. I often woke up at night to the same creaky footsteps outside my door, and they always made my heart skip a beat. Other creepy stuff started to happen around me as well. I would see silhouettes in door openings, shufflings in other rooms, and sometimes hear the opening and closing of doors. The incidents would always happen at night, which really disrupted my sleeping pattern. After a week in that house, I had had enough. I could live with a ghost as a roommate, but I couldn't live without sleep. As I lay in bed and thought about this, I got an idea. My first move against the ghost would be to replace the floor in the hall, kitchen and living room to eliminate any sounds of creaking. As I had this thought, I realized I couldn't remember if the floorboards were nailed or screwed shut. I decided just go and check, since I have a very bad memory and would probably forget to do it the next morning, before I went and bought the tools. I got out of bed and walked fast through the hall. I would check the living room first, I decided, since that would be the easiest room to start with. The room got flooded with bright light as I turned on the lamp, and I swiftly bent down to check the floorboards. The first thing I noticed was that it was nailed shut, which made my job a lot easier. The second thing was that a few of the planks seemed to miss some nails. This confused me, and I touched one of the pieces to see if it was loose. It was, and I could with ease lift the whole plank up. Under the planks, there was a gaping black hole. Intrigued, I continued to lift the rest of the planks till I could slide my whole body through the hole. Reaching down with my foot, I could feel hard, solid concrete. It wasn't deep, so I jumped down. The musty air was almost overwhelming, and I almost gagged. It took a few seconds to adjust to the darkness, but I could eventually make out some objects. On the floor, I could see a sloppy sleeping bag, some old baggy clothes, cans of food, and in the corner, I could see a pile of photographs. I hesitantly walked towards them and slowly picked them up. They were sticky and smelled weird. Staring down at the pictures, I froze. For what they depicted was terrifying. It was photos of me, sleeping. Many were from just outside the door, but a few were close-ups on my face. One portrayed me crawling on all four in the darkness of my living room. And right above me, I could hear the creaking sounds of footsteps